Hey everybody, hope everything's going well for you. I hope you had a great Easter weekend. We're back here with another class of English 375 and we've got a bunch of stuff to do. I'm excited about today's class. We got some fun material to cover. We've been learning a bunch of things over the past couple weeks here about the Theta Criterion and about movement and about how these things, the EPP, right, how we need a subject, all these different sort of constraints and options that we have available to us when we're building our syntactic trees to sort of figure out how English works, right? That's our goal. Recall again our syntactic goal here to have this system of rules in place that can generate all the grammatical sentences of English and none of the ungrammatical ones. And why do we want that? Well, in this class, especially with an ESL bent, we want to keep our eye on that prize of having a good enough understanding of English to be able to explain it to foreign language learners. We're going to dive a little bit harder over these next 2 days into our understanding of English, which is trees. All right, I'm getting at trees here. We're going to do a little bit more tree work, and then we're going to lighten up a little bit in our discussion on Friday, and hopefully a little bit early next week, and talk more about the ESL aspect of our course, and kind of switch back and forth between the two of them, right? You're not leaving trees forever. And especially not today. We got a lot of good trees today. Today we're putting a lot of the pieces together to sort of explain more weird sentences of English. Right? We have a lot of the tools, although we're going to get more tools. We have a lot of the tools we need. Now we're going to see how they start fitting together in kind of interesting ways. So without further ado, let's look at the schedule for today. The other side. Eventually I'll up my game and get a camera on this whiteboard so I don't have to hold it up, but for now this is what we got still. 5 things, now that I've smudged everything with my hand already. 5 things that we're looking at. Number 1, we're going to talk a little bit more about theta roles and the assignment of theta roles. Where and when do these things get assigned? And we'll see that there are restrictions on that. Then, suddenly, once we have established the rules, we're going to immediately break them and see what's going on with what we're going to call raising structures. It's a certain type of sentence that we want to figure out and explain. And that's where we're going to spend the rest of today's class, is talking about these different raising structures. And we'll talk about things like there's going to be movement involved, and we'll motivate this movement. And we'll talk about how and why we motivate movement in syntax. After that, we'll revisit our grammatical model, right, with this step-by-step where we had things like X-bar rules, deep structure, theta criterion, etc. And we'll see where transformational rules, which are movement, fit into this model. And then last, I'm going to leave you with the puzzle. With the tools that we've got right now, we can explain a lot of stuff, and we can even explain most of these raising structures in an adequate fashion. But we can't explain everything. So we have a lot of tools, and they get us really far, which should be fun if you like this kind of things. Satisfying even if you don't like these things, that we've come a long way since the beginning of the semester. But there's still a few puzzling things that we need to figure out. And we'll look at that. That's what we'll end on, the puzzle that we'll then revisit most likely on Wednesday, barring any unforeseen circumstances. So let's dive right into it and look at locality and theta roles. So the question, once again, here to reiterate, is we want to think about where theta roles get assigned. We've already talked about these predicates, these verbal predicates, as controlling theta role assignment, right? In a sentence like, I bought groceries, right? Buy there is assigning 2 theta roles, right? It's a transitive verb. I bought groceries. One object makes it transitive. Intransitive would have been 0. Ditransitive would have been 2 objects. Since we've got 1, we're intransitive. And that it's the verb that's assigning these things, both to the subject, which is sitting up there in spec TP, and to the object, which is typically the complement of the verb. So we want to think about what relationship, structurally, think about things like complements and specifiers and adjuncts, heads. What are the relationships between this verbal predicate and the things that it's assigning theta roles to? What structural arrangement do they have to be in order to be assigned a theta role? And what we're going to see, we're going to take a couple passes of that at this question. And what we're going to find today is that it seems as though theta role assignment is restricted to happening in the same clause as the verbal predicate that's doing the assigning. So the arguments have to be in the same clause as the verbal predicate that's assigning them theta roles. It's a locality constraint. We've seen a few of these. We saw this with binding as well, where anaphors had to be bound within their binding domain, which was the clause. And here, again, we're seeing a locality constraint constricted to the clause level. Anaphors bound within a clause. Non-anaphor pronouns were free within a clause. Could be bound elsewhere. Right? So there was some, we've been paying attention to this clause level for a little while, and here's another instance, right? So take a look at this sentence over here. If we get this sentence, right, like John thinks that left, where what we're after here is that John left, right? John is actually the subject of the leaving, maybe also the subject of the thinking. John thinks that John left, but minimally it has to occur for John to be the leaver, the agent of the leaving in this sentence. It can't be here, right? Left can't say, aha, I will assign it all the way over here. And there might be some other problems going on. It's hard to construct a sentence that just violates this, but we can think about it that way, right? That left can't actually assign all the way outside of its clause. Here I've bracketed the clause to get there. Some evidence that we have that theta roles are assigned within a single clause. And there's some logic, some sort of intuition there as well. Hopefully we can channel that. If not, we have evidence. We have concrete evidence from the English language that this is in fact how this works. Again, we're going to revise this. This actually isn't our final version. We're going to find that it's a little more specific than just the clause level. But we need some other moving parts in place before we revisit that further. So feel free to keep that in the back of your mind if you want, or if you don't want, totally forget and just imagine that theta roles are assigned within a clause. For right now, that's going to work perfectly fine. So we have a new rule. We have a new rule. Now what do we do with our new rule? We break it. We break it. Not really break it, but kind of break it. And we see a new sentence here, right? So let's look at this sentence. Bill is likely to smile. Bill is likely to smile. And what we want to do right now is figure out what theta roles are being assigned here and what the assignment looks like of these theta roles. Bill is likely to smile. So first of all, the question that we want to ask ourselves is, how many predicates, how many assigners do we have? Right? How many assigners, how many predicates do we have? And Bill is likely to smile. Give you a second to think about it. We're going to be working through this problem a little bit together, so I encourage you to get out a piece of paper, and we're going to be drawing some theta grids for this. But first, before we even dive into the drawing of these theta grids, we want to peel apart what pieces we have. And we'll find that here, the question was how many predicates. We've actually got two things. We've got this is likely predicate, is likely, that kind of functions as a unit. Strange, but fine. And we've got this smiling piece. Smile, smile. So we've got two predicates, is likely and smile. I'm going to erase our locality constraint so I can draw in some theta grids here, but don't forget that theta roles must be assigned within a clause. The clause that has the assigner in it, the verbal predicate. Marker. So we've got, again, our two predicates. We've got is likely, which we're going to treat as a single predicate. And then we've got smile. Two predicates here that are going to have some sort of grids appearing underneath them in just a second. Now let's think about what is involved, what arguments are involved for each of these. Who's smiling? Perhaps this one is easier actually to start with. Who is smiling? and Bill is likely to smile? It's Bill, right? Bill is the one that's doing the smiling in this scenario. Think about the semantics, right? Picture this environment. Bill is likely to smile, or at least that's what we're hinting about. It's not concrete because it's only likely, but still, regardless, Bill is the one that is the potential smiler. He's the one that's likely to smile. So we want Bill to be the agent of smile. Are there any other things that are going on with smiling? No. It's just an intransitive predicate there. Bill smiled, right? Bill smiled. So there's just an agent, nothing else. So we're actually done with smile for now. I'll draw that theta grid. I encourage you again to do the same. These should be fairly easy, but you know, practice never hurts. Always good to practice. How do I want to do this? Instead of putting an index, I'm cheating here because I don't have the sentence below it. So I'm going to put the full, instead of putting the index in the lower part of the theta grid here, I just put the actual recipient. Don't do that. Put an index like an I or a J or a K, but I'm cheating. Smile. Takes an agent DP. And what's that agent DP? What's smiling? Who's the potential smiler here? Ah, it's Bill. Sweet. So far, so good. What is likely? What's likely here, right? So is likely. It's going to assign some sort of theta role, at least one, maybe two, maybe three. What is likely in this scenario? Think about that for a second. Is Bill likely? Is Bill what's likely? Right? It seems that way. It seems that way in some sense because Bill is in what looks to be, we haven't drawn the tree yet, but we might think on a first pass, and you'd be right, Bill is in the structural subject position of this predicate is likely. So maybe Bill's like the agent of is likely, Bill is likely. Semantically, that doesn't make sense, right? There's nothing likely about Bill. Like that, you need more, right? That's not what's likely. What's likely is the proposition Bill to smile. Bill smiling is what's likely, right? It's Bill smiling that is likely, not just Bill itself, right? Bill isn't being assigned an independent theta role from is likely. Rather, this whole proposition Bill to smile, I had to think about that one, Bill to smile is what's likely there. Yeah. So, we need to deconstruct this. Let's draw the theta grid. Let's continue our process here of drawing the theta grid for is likely. Do this on your own. So here, for is likely, we find that it takes one, it assigns one theta role. It's a propositional CP. And we find this to be true with is likely in general, right? Here our propositional CP is something like Bill to smile. But we find that we can do this with other things like is likely, right? Like that I give this lecture slightly late is likely. That Ross gives his lecture slightly late. That's the proposition, is likely, right? So is likely there is assigning its propositional CP theta role to that Ross gives his lecture late. That's the CP. That I eat French fries is likely. And we can tell that the that I eat French fries is a CP there, particularly because of the that, right? That I eat French fries is likely. So we see that in other scenarios, is likely is also assigning this propositional CP. So for us, it's a little less straightforward because the propositional CP, Bill to smile, isn't contiguous. It's on either side of this likely. So we have some weirdness going on here. We have some weirdness going on there. What else does this violate? What else is weird here? What else is strange? Well, what else is strange, again, is basically that Bill is appearing where it is. Bill appearing in the subject position of is likely is causing all kinds of problems. A, it's making it harder for us to see the CP, Bill to smile, to reconstruct that CP. And the other thing that it's doing is it's violating the locality constraint of theta roles. Because Bill is not appearing in the clause with the thing that assigns its theta role. Smile. Smile is assigning Bill a theta role. It's the agent of smiling. Yet, Bill actually isn't in the clause with smile, to smile. So that's a problem. It feels like, it seems like a violation of this rule that we just constructed. The locality constraint on theta roles. Do we see? Stop for a second and make sure you understand why this is a violation of this locality constraint on theta roles. Because the thing that is assigning Bill a theta role, smile, is in a different clause. The assigner and the assignee are in two different clauses. This one is in the clause to smile, and this one is in the clause like Bill is likely. So that's a problem. That's a problem. If we sort of peel back this sentence and we reconstruct sort of its theta role appropriate form, what do we get? I'll show you. Oh, you might even be able to see. But I'll show you in a second. So if we undo the strangeness of this sentence, the weird positioning of Bill, and we kind of put Bill where it should go, right, where we expect it to go, we get a sentence like this. Is likely Bill to smile. Is likely, and then this whole CP, Bill to smile, right? Where there's a clausal boundary there. I'll denote this clausal boundary by this bracketing. Is likely Bill to smile. That's kind of, now we understand that here is likely is assigning its propositional CP theta role to its complement, which is totally fine, Bill to smile, and smile is assigning its agent DP theta role to Bill, which is in the same clause now. So we kind of fixed it by this unraveling procedure. We did this with movement before. I spoiled the show, right? What's going on here? It's movement. It's movement. So we want to say that this is how it started, and what happened is that Bill, other direction, moved out to this fronting position. We fronted Bill there. So we've talked about theta grids. We've talked about this from a theta grid perspective up to this point. Let's introduce trees into our equation here, and let's see if we can draw a tree for this underlying representation, for this form, this unraveled version, this pre-movement version, right? We know we want Bill here so that it can get its agent theta role from smile, and we know we have to end up with Bill up here because that's what the sentence is. Bill is likely to smile, right? That's just our concrete evidence. So let's start by drawing the underlying form, and then we'll see about movement afterwards. I'm going to erase this because it's kind of in the way. And conveniently, I already have this tree, the skeleton of this tree drawn out, and we'll fill it in together. So you can draw this. I'll show the skeleton in a second. Feel free to copy that skeleton down on your own piece of paper, and then we'll just fill it in together. Aha, I get to go to this side now. Right, so here we have our upper clause going to a TP, going to a VP, and this VP is a weird predicate. This is one of the things that I wanted to show you. This is a weird predicate because it's the is likely predicate. is likely. And the way that works is just a VP going to an adjective phrase. This is actually an adjective. Likely here is operating as an adjective. So we have is going to likely, straightforward, where likely here is the complement to is, and this whole thing operates as a predicate together. And it takes as its complement here, coming from this adjective bar, a CP. Is likely, and here's our smiling clause. So this lower CP here is our smiling clause. This is the is likely clause, we can call it that, think of it that way. And this CP and below is the smiling clause. So that's our skeleton structure for this sentence. We have some things to fill out. Where do we want to put Bill? I haven't slotted Bill into this structure yet, but think to yourself, where does Bill go in the underlying version? Is likely Bill to smile? I actually want to rewrite that. Just maybe a little smaller so it doesn't get in our way. So again, we're trying to draw the tree structure for this underlying sentence. Is likely Bill to smile? And the question is, where does Bill go? Well, we kind of already answered that a little bit. We said that Bill is the agent of to smile and is likely the subject here. It's the subject. So it's in a subject position. Where do our subjects go? Spec TP. Hopefully you knew that. Spec TP. So which spec TP, because we have two of them, do we want it to be the subject of this is likely, or do we want it to be the subject of the smiling? Well, since we're doing this sentence, is likely Bill to smile, we know we want it in the lower position, the lower spec TP. So I'm going to draw that in. We'll start filling this thing in. I'm going to cheat and use triangles. Don't cheat at home. So with my cheating ways here, I slotted in this phrase here, a DP Bill, into the specifier of TP, spec TP, specifier of TP position, the subject position there. Bill to smile. Now we have our sentence. Is likely Bill smile. Ooh, we're missing a word still. What do? We figured out what to do with Bill. The other one I didn't put in here for you is this little word to. Where do we want to slot in to? Well, there's a couple different ways we can approach this question, right? First is the sort of, well, if we assume that it hasn't moved, what slots do we have available? Be careful, be careful, be careful about using linear structure to figure out where something goes in a tree structure. It's often really deceiving. But we can use it as a ballpark. If we can confirm it with other evidence, it's okay to use as a ballpark. So 2, right, like we want it to go between Bill and smile. Between Bill and smile linearly. What slots do we have available to put 2 into? Not many options, right? I mean, we could draw a new phrase. We could draw a new phrase for it. So we could have something, for instance, coming off of this V-bar, coming off in this direction, because that would still give us the right linear order. Or we could have something coming off of this DP, coming off to the left there. Left. Coming off to the right. To the right. Directions are hard in mirror. Coming off to the right. That would also give us the right linear structure. Or we could just put it in T. Could just put it in T. Let's use that as our default hypothesis. Let's see, is there any evidence that 2 in fact goes in T? Is there any evidence? Think to yourself, how would I determine that? How would I determine whether 2 is generated in T or not? We just did this operation. Right? When did we ask a similar question? So let's use our pattern recognition and our recall here. When did we ask a similar question? Well, we asked a similar question when we wondered if auxiliary verbs like be and is and have were in T or not. Were they in the same place as modal verbs and tense? We asked ourselves the same question. Is in fact tense in the same position as modal verbs? Are tense and modal verbs in the same questions? We're asking a very similar question now. We're asking, is to also in that position of tense and modal verbs? What evidence did we use? Well, we used this notion of, kind of complementary distribution. We saw that with tense and modal verbs, you couldn't get both at the same time. You had to choose one or the other. You could get a sentence like, I should go, or I went, with that past tense. But you could not get the sentence, I should went. Like, that sounds awful, right? Truly awful. I should went, where you're trying to generate went, go with the past tense. So you're trying to generate a past tense and should at the same time. And why was that bad? Well, there's only one slot. There's only one T. There's only one T. And so this gave us evidence that modal verbs and tense were actually the same type of thing. They're both generated in T. We saw that wasn't the case with auxiliaries, right? I should have, right, done something. So we said that somewhere else. Now let's think about to. Can you get to and modal verbs, so this infinitive to, like to smile, can you get that to and a modal verb in the same clause? So let's try a multi-clausal one, or like, I think that I should smile. So we got the should. I think that I should smile. Can we get a to in there? I should to smile. I too should smile. I think I too should smile. All right, we don't want the I also should smile, so that doesn't work. We can get sentences like, I like to smile. But can you get something like, I like should to smile? No, I like to should smile. You can get I should like, but there should is part of that higher phrase, that higher clause, I like, and not part of the lower clause, to smile. So we find that in fact these are in complementary distribution. You can do some more digging on your own if that example went by a little too quickly for you, or you can feel free to ask me about this on Friday's in-person class. This is kind of an important concept of this complementary distribution, meaning things are the same. So we want to say that yes, in fact, to goes in T. I haven't put it there yet. Blast. To goes in T. Bam. So now we've generated all the words. We have this, right? Is likely Bill to smile. Is likely Bill to smile. Cool. Cool. And we see here again that in this unwrapped version, all the theta criterion is met here. And the locality constraint on theta role assignment is also met. Smile has one theta role to give, it gives it to Bill, and it gives it locally within the clause. Is likely has one theta role to give, and it gives it to its complement. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. So the theta criterion is met, the locality constraints are met. Boom. We have a good sentence, right? No, not quite. Something happened to it. Something happened to it. Why? What happened? We know that movement happened here. Why do we know that movement happened? Well, because we know that we ended up with this sentence. Bill is likely to smile. But we want to ask ourselves, why? Why does movement happen? We have this powerful mechanic, movement. But we don't want to just be able to move things around willy-nilly. That's too powerful, right? That would over-generate sentences. We would get too many sentences of English that were actually ungrammatical. So we want to constrain our movement by what we're going to say is motivation. We need to have motivation whenever we do movement. And so we want to ask ourselves, what's the movement? What's missing? Does this violate any of our rules such that we can justify movement to motivate it? And it does break one of our rules. This sentence breaks one of our constraints that we've talked about. Which one? Which constraint does this sentence break as we've drawn it right now? We just said it passes the theta criterion, so it's not that one. It's basically the other one. We haven't talked about that many. This breaks the EPP, the extended projection principle. What does the extended projection principle say? Every clause needs a subject. There must be something in spec TP, specifier of TP. Is there something in a specifier of TP down here? Yep, so this clause is fine. Is there something in the specifier of TP for this higher clause? Nope. Nope. No. So this failure of one of our constraints, this failure to accommodate the EPP, is our motivation for movement. Aha, something's wrong, so let's move to fix it. How do we fix it? Well, again, to fix the EPP, we need something in the specifier of TP position. What goes there? Subjects. How many subjects do we have? Well, we just have the one. So we're going to move our subject up to the spec TP position. I'll draw that in, and you'll follow along. All right, what was I doing here? Trace. Sweet. Oh, my arrow. I forgot my arrow. So, in order to accommodate, our problem for this sentence was there's nothing in the higher spec TP position. There's nothing in the higher clause's subject position. And so our solution is to move something there. And we didn't have many options for what to move. We only had one subject, so we're going to move that subject. And we're going to end up with this sentence now. Bill is likely to smile. Hey, hey, hey. What was the sentence that we started with? Bill is likely to smile. We've correctly generated from this underlying sentence, is likely Bill to smile, ungrammatical, but passes the theta criterion. We've come up against this sentence. Bill is likely to smile, a nice grammatical sentence. And we've motivated it. We've motivated this by saying it was the EPP and this empty TP that forced this subject to raise up to there. This is why we call them raising structures. This also hits at our point of motivating movement. Well, remember that we always want to motivate our movement. Here, what's the motivation? The EPP. The EPP is our motivation. Sweet. So we've correctly derived this sentence. But there's a few things we need to talk about. There's a few things that this derivation, this tree structure shows us. One thing that this tree structure shows us. How's my time doing? Okay, I'm doing okay. A little long, but we're going a little slow, but that's okay. Important things to take away from a tree structure like this. One of them is this. Let's think about the EPP again. Now that we've done this movement, is there something in this specifier TP position to satisfy the EPP? Yeah, of course, Bill is there. So it's satisfied with results to the upper clause. Is there something in specifier TP of this lower clause that's satisfying the EPP? Now that's a tougher question. In some ways here, the proof is in the pudding, right? If the EPP is violated, it leads to an ungrammatical sentence. Sorry, I'm waving my board all along. I'm trying to get the glare better. If the EPP is violated, that comes across to us as speakers of English as an ungrammatical sentence. Exhibit A. Is likely Bill to smile violates the EPP, and it sounds ungrammatical to us. Right? Those two things, all sentences that violate the EPP should sound ungrammatical, like this one. So the fact that this sentence is in fact grammatical, Bill is likely to smile, in a weird kind of backwards way, shows us that this sentence actually does satisfy the EPP. Proof is in the pudding there. Theoretically, what this tells us is that traces, I've left a trace here, right? So this trace says something used to be here and it moved out. That's what the trace is saying. This trace satisfies the EPP. When the EPP checks clauses, and it checks this clause, and it looks for something in the specifier of the TP position, the trace satisfies it. That counts as having something in that position. There's something there. It's a trace, right? It's not an overt word. You don't pronounce that. We don't pronounce this sentence, Bill is likely, trace, to smile. Okay, it's not pronounced. It's not overt, right? Overt means it's pronounced, right? It's not an overt thing, but there is still something here. And in fact, this is one of the reasons we leave behind these little traces when we move something out, is to show us, to help us to remember that in fact there is something here. It's not actually empty. Even though you don't hear anything pronounced, this isn't actually empty. There's a little subtle trace of something, a remembrance of something there. And what we found out in this sentence is that that trace is enough to satisfy the EPP. Cool. That's cool, right? So that's one. That's lesson one that we've learned from these weird raising structures. We've learned kind of that we've remembered, I told you about this before, but it's enforced our impetus to motivate our movement. And here we're motivating our movement using the EPP. Second point is that a trace is enough to satisfy the EPP. That's another thing that we've learned. And lastly, we've seen something about the order of operations with regards to our constraints, that these happen in a stepwise fashion, right? You start with, how do I want to show this? You start with this underlying form. Then you check the theta criterion. The theta criterion checks at this underlying form. Next, you do transformations, and you get Bill is likely to smile. We've done transformations. After transformations, you check for the EPP, and the EPP is satisfied here. I'm going to go over that again more slowly, because this is important, and I'm going to draw as we go. This probably will be the last thing we do. I'm trying to keep these not super long. This will certainly be the last thing we do. Cool. So let's go over this derivation, the same derivation. I know I'm being boring. Let's go over it one by one step at a time, given our model of grammar, which I'm going to draw right now. This will take me just a second. I'm going to undo the movement on my tree right now as well. And I'll explain why I'm doing that in just a second. So we have this model of grammar, and what this model of grammar is doing is it's giving us a step-by-step instructions on how to create these trees. What are these trees? The trees are grammatical sentences. It's giving us a step-by-step instruction manual on how to generate trees grammatically. This is a mental model of kind of what's happening in our brains. Is this exactly what's happening in our brains? Like, no, but it's close. It's a model of that thing. So what we do here is we take our lexicon, we take the words that we have stored, we know what likely means, and we know what smiling is, and we know things about these arguments and about these predicates, etc. And we use our X bar rules to generate a structure for them. So here we have our base X bar rules generated. And what we get from this combination of the lexicon and the X bar rules is called the D structure. It's called the deep structure. That's what D stands for there. It's called the D structure. And this is the structure that's generated by our rules before anything is moved, right? As far as what our rules look like, remember way back in the day when we had rules that looked like this. Remember, our rules were like this. CP goes to C bar goes to CTP. So once we generate our rules, CP goes to C bar goes to CTP, etc., 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 we get this structure, the deep structure. The deep structure. Nothing has moved yet. Everything is in the spot where it's generated. We're going to talk about this as the spots where you generate things. So in particular here, the subject bill is generated in this lower clause next to smile, which is the predicate for which it's the subject. So now we have the deep structure, our D structure. Success. We move on to our next step. And our next step, oh, I missed it. Oh, no. I just didn't write a step into our model. That's embarrassing. Did any of you catch how I messed this up? And you didn't even tell me. So far we were on the right track. I hadn't messed anything up so far. The lexicon and the X bar combine to make the deep structure. But in between, the next step is what's different. The next step is the Theta Criterion. Sorry, it's going to be all crunched together now because I didn't plan my space appropriately. Well, you can either look in your book or on a previous lecture if you want a prettier version of this. So, okay, we did lexicon plus X bar rules equals D structure. What do we do next? We check the Theta Criterion. We check the Theta Criterion right now on our D structure, as is. So let's check our Theta Criterion. We did all of these things individually. Now I'm just going through it one more time, to reiterate and to show you how this works stepwise. So let's check our Theta Criterion with the current tree that we have. Okay, smile. Recall our theta grid. Hopefully you still have it written down. 1, theta role, takes an agent DP, smiler. Here it is. Within its locality constraints, within its clause. Boom. Smile checks out, passes the Theta Criterion. Is likely. 1 theta role to give to a CP proposition. Here it is, the CP proposition, bill to smile. It checks out. The CP has only gotten one theta role. DP has also only gotten 1 theta role. So we have that one-to-one matching. Theta role passes. Rewind. Take a second if that doesn't make sense. Feel free to slow down there. We've passed that. Now, next step. We move things. We move things. So we've passed the Theta Criterion, and we never need to come back to it. That's the fun part. We never need to check that again. So now we do some transformations. What transformations do we do? Well, I'm not going to lie. This part's a bit weird. What we're going to do is we're going to cheat. We're going to look ahead and say, like, okay, what do we need to do? Hey, guys, we're going to have a quick huddle up. And we're going to say, what do we need to change before we get to the EPP? And then we know in our huddle, we're like, oh shoot, this is going to cause us to fail. Quick, before the EPP happens, quick, move something there. And so we do, right? That's the transformation with motivation. We move now. We're trying to avoid failing the EPP. Again, a little bit of look ahead. We know that the EPP is coming, and quick, at this transformational step, we're going to move something up into that specifier of TP position, such that we don't fail. So let's do that. I'm going to write that on my tree now. Movement only happens at this stage, crucially after the theta criterion. Sweet. Now we've done our transformation, right? I just redid this movement of the DP bill up to this place. Note, we've done our transformations. If we were to go backwards and check the theta criterion, would it pass? It would not pass at this point. It would fail the locality constraint because right now, Bill isn't in the same clause as to smile, so it can't be assigned its theta role. Ah, blast. But we don't have to go back to the theta criterion. We already passed that phase. So now that we're at transformations, we have this sentence, Bill is likely to smile. We check the EPP. Now, does the EPP pass? Is there something in spec TP? Yes, Bill. Is there something in this spec TP? Yes, there's a trace. It counts, and it passes the EPP. This is a slick little mechanic that just happened, right? We've got these two constraints. The theta criterion is a constraint. The EPP is also a constraint. This isn't a constraint. This is just a movement, right? It's an action. And this one is a constraint. This one is a constraint. And they're crucially structured, right? If the theta criterion instead happened after movement, after transformations, like we talked about, it would fail in this sentence. But it doesn't. It happens before. If the EPP constraint happened before movement, it would fail because there wouldn't be anything in spec TP. So these are crucially ordered. It has to be theta criterion, transformations, then EPP. That's the only order that makes this work. Slick, huh? Slick. Now, so we've passed our theta criterion, we did our transformations, now we check EPP, we passed that too. Now we get to what's called, this is now called, this is called the S structure. It's the surface structure, and the S structure is what gets pronounced. This is how we actually say the sentence. Is this, double check, is this how we actually say the sentence? Bill is likely to smile? Yeah, Bill is likely to smile. That totally works. So that passes. It doesn't really pass. It's not a constraint. It just shows us the S structure. And then we do our grammaticality judgments and we say, does that sound like a good sentence? English speakers say yes, yes. Well, Midwest standard, whatever dialect we're speaking, English speakers do anyway. So we did it. We've redone our model now. This is how it's actually going to stay for the rest of class. I'm not messing with this model of grammar anymore, I think. So we've seen a few things. Let's recap and then we'll end here. I got 1 minute to recap. We've seen this locality constraint on theta roles, that theta roles have to be assigned within their domain, within their clause. We've then seen raising structures which on the surface structure seem to violate this. And we've posited that there's actually movement there. That it's not in fact a violation of the theta roles because you check theta criterion and then you move. And we've seen this weird structure, Bill is likely to smile, with movement, a type of movement we haven't really seen. And why do we have this type of movement? The EPP. We motivated, point number 3, we motivated our movement with the extended projection principle, the EPP. Lastly, what we did was we revisited our model of grammar, this stepwise construction that tells you when to do what, when to perform each constraint, when to perform the movement, when to perform the other constraints, etc. And that this is critical. This isn't random. You can't do all these at the same time. You have to order these. And in fact, they have to be ordered like this to make the sentence work. That, friends, students, was a lot of information. We covered a lot of ground. We're going to be talking about the same things again on Wednesday. We're going to slow it down. We're going to go into more depth. We'll use more examples. Bill will no longer be likely to smile. It's fine. Hopefully you'll be more likely to smile, and we'll figure this out. Then if you have questions about this or anything that we talked about last week, we're going to have a big movement section on Friday where you ask all your questions about movement. You ask me, what the heck are these traces? Ross, why are you just putting everything in T that you don't like modals and tense and to? Fair question. We can talk about all of those things in class on Friday. I'll have some examples, some practice for us to go through. Yeah, that's the plan. Thanks for listening to a very long lecture. Feel free, again, as always, when we're doing these, to pause these and come back to them, to rewind them, watch pieces again, etc. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you guys again for another recording on Wednesday.